All right, let's talk about one more aspect of map files that can be very, very useful. What you can do, because you're using a file on disk to save your data, you can use that for a two-stage script. So, for example, you could create a map of a bunch of data from your files or your books, and you could save that to disk. Then later on, you could write another script that actually takes that data and does something with it. And where that comes in handy is if you're collecting a lot of data and it takes a long time to collect it, and you want to run a series of scripts on that data, you don't have to generate that data fresh each time. You only have to generate it whenever your documents or your books are updated. So let's look at this. We've roughed out another script here. And basically what we want to do is we want to prompt for the map file. So we've got a little function here, get map file, and it's just a simple prompt. It's an open dialog method on the path. So we create a path, and we're using this app opendir, and what that is that's just a variable that says what's the last folder we worked in. And so we use that as a starting point to prompt us for that file that we're looking for. And then we're just simply going to return it. If we click cancel, it'll return null. If we click OK, we pick a file and click OK, it will return a file object. So let's go up here to our main function and let's try that. So we're going to say map file equals get map file, and then well, let's just display it. So we'll say alert map file semicolon. We've got a call up here to our main function. So let's go here, and we don't even need anything open here actually. In fact, let's do this. I don't want you to think that this requires anything open. So we can say close all files in book, and then we'll actually close the book file. So this could be run with nothing open if it was appropriate. We could run it on an active document, but it does not require an active document or an active book, and that's kind of my point here. So let's go ahead and run this and see what we get. Okay, yeah, so what we do is we get a prompt here, and let's cancel it. And we did not get an alert. Oh, we got an alert. We just got a little delay there. Okay, so yeah, we got null because we clicked cancel. So we can test for that, because if the user cancels that prompt, we don't want to do anything. We just want to bail out. Let's try it again. Let's run this, and this time let's pick our marker map. Click OK, and that just again gives us a file object. So now we have something that we can open and load and use as an XML object. So let's go back to our code. All right, so we can say if map file, and then that's really all we need, because if it returns null, this will be false. And let's clarify that though. Let's make sure that's the case. So we're going to say alert map file. And if we don't get an alert, well, let's just do this. Let's do this. Sometimes you can be a little bit, you can be real, you can test a lot here, and sometimes it's worth doing that. So let's just do this. User canceled. Let's save it. And let's go back to FrameMaker and make sure this works. So we're going to click Run. We're going to pick a file, double click, and yes, it picked it. We're going to try it again. This time we're going to cancel. User canceled. Okay, so we know that this works. And I find early on in your script development career, you want to make sure that you're testing as you go along. You don't want to write, 10, 15, 50, 100 lines of code and have it not work, and then you don't realize, well, where is it failing? So once we have the map file, let's see what it takes to get an actual map, an actual XML object. So let's create a variable here, and we're going to create a new function, and we'll call this function load XML. Load XML. So what we're going to do is now we have an XML file in memory, and we want to load it, and so we can use it in our code. Just like we used it in the other script, but this time we're not going to create it here. We're just going to load it, and it already exists. So let's create some variables here. So we have a file object that we're passing in, and then we want to create, let's call this a settings object. So let's call this var settings, and then we can actually call it what we want, but and then we're going to actually add something to that. We're going to add some errors. We're going to add an array of errors, and the reason we're going to do that is because what if we have problems loading this file? What if it's not well-formed XML? What if the file is empty or whatever? So we want to account for that. So we're going to say errors, and this will be an array because maybe there's more than one error. And then what we want to do is we want to set the files encoding because we've saved this as a UTF-8 file, and we want to make sure that when we read this in, it gets read in as a UTF-8 file. So we're going to do that. And then we are going to we're going to make sure it exists. Now we know it exists, but if we were to isolate this function and use it in another script, then we may want to know that it exists. And so we'll say, let's do it this way. We'll say if file exists equals false. Well, that's going to be an error. That's going to be a problem because we can't load a file that doesn't exist. So what we'll do is we'll push that into our errors array. So we'll say settings errors push, and we'll say the file does not exist. Okay, so that would be an error, obviously. And then to make it useful, we'll actually push the file name into the array. And if we use the file variable, and then the fs name variable will give us the path, the full Windows path to this script. Now what we'll do here is we can't really go any farther because if the file doesn't exist, we can't read it. So we're going to actually return the settings. We're going to return this variable here that we created. Now what'll happen here is we're going to say map equals load XML, and we're going to pass in the map file. So what we can do here is we can test the errors member. So this is actually not even going to be the map. This is actually going to be the map. This is going to actually be a map object that has this settings, this errors as part of it. And you'll see that in a minute because we'll hide that file to make sure that that we can do that. Okay, so let's open the file. So now we've gotten this far. We don't have any errors here, and so now we're going to try to open the file. So we're going to say file, open, and we're going to open it for reading. We're not going to open it for writing. If we open it for writing, we end up deleting everything in it. But if we open it for reading, then it's going to be fine. And then we're going to do a try catch block. So we're going to say try. Let's try reading it into an XML object. So we're going to say settings.xml equals new XML. So we're going to create a new XML object, and we're going to read the contents of this file into that object. Now when we use the XML object this way, if there's any errors in that XML, if it's not well formed, if there's the attributes aren't quoted correctly, then this will fail, and that's why we have a try catch block. And then the other thing we like to do is, if this works, I like to store the actual path, the actual file object in the object here, in the settings object, because we might want to use it later if we want to resave the file or whatever. So now we need a catch block, and actually we'll use a variable here. And this is sometimes a common convention when you have a catch block, because what you're doing is you're usually catching an error, and so we just put that in an E variable, and we can read that to see what the error is. So we're going to say settings errors push there was an error reading the XML file. And then we'll put in a colon here because we will, and actually let's do that here. Okay, and then what we'll do is we'll do the same thing here. We'll push the file name on there so they know what file caused the error. Paste that in there. And then the other thing we want to do is we want to push the error itself on there because we want them to be able to figure out, gee, what is the error? Now, an error won't necessarily be generated every time, but when you do read an XML, when you read a file into an XML object, it'll give you a pretty intelligent error. And then finally, we want to close this file because we can't leave it open. We want to close it. And then we want to return the settings object. So we're going to say return settings. So this will always get returned. So if there's a problem, if it can't find the file, it'll return it here. If it makes it through, finds the file, opens it, reads it, or even if it doesn't read it, it has errors, the file will get closed, and then we'll return settings. So let's look at this, and then what we'll do here is, I want you to see this first. We'll say map reflect properties. Because in our other script, the map was actually the XML object. In this case, this is really like a settings object. And to make this less confusing, let's do it this way. Let's do it this way. Settings, copy. Yeah, so we'll distinguish that from the map. And let's, yeah, we want to do this. Let's do this. And then later on, we maybe we'll assign the map to the map variable to the actual map object that's part of this settings object. So let's see if that makes sense. So let's go here and let's run this. We'll pick our marker map. And let's see, we got an error. It says line 19. So let's check line 20 of the script and see if that makes sense. Yeah, okay, so we didn't create an object here. Okay, so I need to create the object first. So I need to say settings equals, and then I need to just use an object literal. So we tried to assign something to an object that didn't exist. That's what the problem was. So let's go back here. Let's run this. Let's pick our marker map. And so this is what it consists of. We have an errors array. We have an XML object. And we have a file object that we stored. And the rest of these are just built into ExtendScript. So now what we want to do is we want to test that errors array. Now it's empty. It'll stay empty if there's no errors. So what we can do is we can test that. We can say if settings errors length is equal to 0, then we know that thing loaded with no problem. Okay, and then we can actually do this. We can say map equals settings.xml. And let's just display it. Alert map to XML string. And then we'll actually see that we have this XML object now in memory. Okay, so let's run that. Let's pick the marker map, and then you can see we got our XML object. And now we can pass that around to whatever functions, whatever we want to do. We want to query this, we want to write a report from it, whatever we want to do. But now that data that we created with our other script now is actually stored, and we're able to pick it up and use it in other scripts. So let's go back here and let's create an error in this file. So we got it here. And what we'll do is we'll take out one of these quotes, just for an example. So now we have XML that's not well formed. And you can see here we've got this error. So let's see what gets reported. Now we need to go back to the script first, though. And we need to trap that. So if the settings errors length is greater than 0, then that means we've got a problem. So now we can say alert And we'll display that. So we'll say settings, errors, and then we'll separate it by a return. So the dialog box gives us a one line for each of those members of the array. So let's see what that gives us. Let's go here. Let's run it. Let's pick out that object, that XML file. So now we get the error. So now it says there was an error reading the XML file. Remember, we pushed that onto the array. Here's the path to that file. So we can go find it and say, hey, what's the problem? Now we should know where it is because we're prompted for it. In some scripts, though, you may load it automatically. And then it says syntax error, XML error at line 7, not well formed. So we got an invalid token. So we can see how close that is. And yeah, it's one line off, but it's pretty close. Let's do another. Let's break something else here and then show you that. So here, like for example, we're not closing this. So now we have an illegal element here because we have a doc element, but we didn't close it. All right. So now let's go here and see what it tells us. Let's run that. Yeah, there was an error reading the XML file. Same thing. We got the file name, XML error at line 43, mismatch tag. Now again, these line numbers aren't always so useful because really the error is up here on line 4, but it really doesn't show up until down here because it's given us a chance to close this. Like for example, what the parser thinks is, well, they opened up a document or an element rather, they didn't close it, and maybe they're not going to close it till later. So for example, if I was to do this, I could close it down here, and then these would all be children of that top one. But that's obviously not what we want. So just a little bit of error checking there. Let's undo that. And for completeness, we'll save it and run it one more time. And there we go. So now we got it. And again, let's take one final look at this script. And you'll see now, we basically have 3 simple functions. We get the map file. Once we got the map file and it's not null, then we attempt to load that into memory by calling this function. And we check the errors. Are there any errors? If there's no errors, now we can do something else here. We can run now. We can say, do something else and use this map. If we don't get that, we want to notify the user that there's a problem.